Hello, folks. Hey, this is Dr. Terry and Tom here at the Metaphysical Mysteries, the most interesting part of your day. And we have with us a fantastic guest, Kathleen Marden, who is known for research in UFOs, an author of 6 books. And what many of you may remember was her uncle and aunt, Betty and Barney. Okay, they were back in the day. I mean, you had the whole Roswell incident, and then Betty and Barney Hill were actually picked up, supposedly in a UFO as the report happens, and the hypnotherapy brought out a lot more of it. And I think that's kind of a next big block. You went from Roswell over to your aunt and uncle, in my opinion. And this was a close encounter of the 3rd kind or 4th kind. I guess they're calling them 5 kinds now. So we are extremely happy to have you here, Kathleen. And
thank you. Great to be with you today.
Absolutely. You want to give us a little of your background, because this became a family affair for you, maybe whether you wanted it or not. But
well, it did. I was 13 years old when my aunt and uncle took that surprise trip that he was giving to her to Montreal. And first they stopped in Niagara Falls, and then went up to a couple of days later to Montreal, and then we're going to spend the night there, but decided to drive home through New Hampshire at night. And as they were heading south on Route 3 in upstate New Hampshire, Betty saw a new light in the sky that soon came in very, very close. They'd been watching it for about a half hour at this point. They'd gotten out to look at it a couple of times and could see that it was rotating. It was lighted on one side. It was unconventional because it was just sitting there in the sky silently. And then they're back in the car heading south on Route 3 when this craft surges ahead and stops over the highway. Just for my uncle not to stop directly underneath it, he had to stop in the middle of the highway. He got out of the car, the door was open. He's looking up at this craft with binoculars that he'd had on his seat. And he could see this lighted row of windows. And then he stepped back away from the car, and the craft shifted to an adjacent field that was just to the east of him. And so he went to the edge of the field to look at it, trying to identify it. He was not going to say that this was a flying saucer. That's what they were calling them in those days.
right.
He did not believe this was even possible. But as he looked up through binoculars, and this is all conscious recall at this point, not brought out through hypnosis for the first time.
Right.
He observed figures looking back at him. They were dressed in black, shiny uniforms. One appeared to have something on his head that Barney thought was a cap. But in my years of research and investigation, I've been able to acquire a few photographs, clear photographs of these ETs. And they're wearing headgear. So what he saw must have been some kind of headgear that they were wearing. All but one walked to a panel. When that happened, this little red light started to slide out on fin-like structures. Something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. I also have a photograph of actual video of that. That is the carrier beam that people get absorbed into when they're taken up to craft. And he began to panic. He thought that they were going to capture him. He said, like a bug in a net. And he pulled the binoculars away from his eyes so forcefully that the strap broke. And he ran back to the car screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. He went speeding down the highway. When he had gotten into the car, he saw the craft coming in his direction. And within moments, he and Betty heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the vehicle. It made their car vibrate, and they felt a tingling sensation through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway, and they heard these buzzing sounds again. It restored them to full consciousness. And they had memories of finding themselves on a dirt road. They didn't know where or when that occurred, of a roadblock, of a fiery orb that seemed to be sitting on the ground. And they went back to that place time and time again, just looking for that place, and didn't find it until after they'd had their hypnosis sessions and could remember precisely where it was. But when they arrived home, it was at least 2 hours later than it should have been. I have Betty's watch that she was wearing that night. Their watches had stopped and never worked again. But when she arrived home, she set her watch to the time on her house clock, and it says 5:16. And she wound it, but it never worked again. Her dress was torn in several places. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to buy new shoes. There was a lot of distressing evidence and no conscious recall for what had happened. There were shiny spots in the trunk of the car where they heard those buzzing sounds. And when they placed a compass over those spots, the needle would spin and spin, indicating there was a magnetic field there. So it was very interesting for me, but I just, I went on and I did the mainstream thing. I went to college. I went into psychiatric social work. I then went into education, taught school. I was an education services coordinator. And then I became ill in about 1990 and had to decide what I was going to do. Well, when I went to college initially, I wanted to be a writer. I just loved writing. But my Aunt Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. And she said, "Oh, Kathy, do something practical. You'll be able to retire from the state of New Hampshire with a pension and you'll have medical insurance." And so I said, "Okay." She said, "You'll never make a living as a writer. Don't do it." And so here I was, disabled, and that's what I could do. I could do it on my own time. Right. And so I decided that I wanted to investigate my aunt and uncle's case. My uncle had died at age 46. He was no longer around. This was in 1969 when he died. But here it is, like 1988, probably. When I'm
sick. We want to point out this all took place in 1961, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
In 1961.
Yes, that's been a while ago.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So here it is, 1988, and I joined the Mutual UFO Network. I studied to become a field investigator. I passed the exam, and I used those skills to investigate my aunt and uncle's case. I also went through that route they took that night time and time again, measuring the distance, the miles per hour they were driving. I took a skeptical approach and I did everything by the book in the investigation. Is there a prosaic explanation for this missing time? Is there some kind of explanation for the evidence? And Betty gave me the hypnosis tapes. They had 10 hours of hypnosis with neuropsychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon. He was renowned in his field. He had set up the neuropsychiatric unit at the Mason General Hospital during World War II. He was a colonel in the Army, and he had a great deal of success treating veterans returning from the war with shell shock, conversion hysteria, that sort of thing. Barney had conversion hysteria. He had nearly died from a bleeding ulcer that resulted from his strong emotional reaction to this UFO event and all of the questions surrounding it. And so he wanted to forget about it, but my Aunt Betty wouldn't let him. She was a lot like me, very curious. And so he ended up very ill in the hospital, had to take a leave of absence from his job, and he was referred to Dr. Simon, who was an excellent psychiatrist who used deep trance hypnosis with Barney to assist him in working through what had occurred to him. And he recovered. And Betty went along with him. She wanted hypnosis too. And so Dr. Simon agreed to see her separately. He took them separately and reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. So they could not compare notes. They couldn't even remember what they stated until at the end of their therapy, he sat them down together and played all of the tapes for them, and they talked about them. But this was very interesting to me because there was speculation that Betty had a series of dreams and that she had told Barney everything about her dreams and that he had absorbed that information and relived it under hypnosis. I wanted to do a comparative analysis on this. So I wasn't a very good typist in those days, but I transcribed their hypnosis tapes and I lined them up sentence by sentence, descriptive detail by descriptive detail from the beginning of their trip until days after they arrived home. And what I discovered is that it was a real event. The information that each revealed was not even in Betty's dreams. There was information that was extraordinarily interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so I think I've done the most thorough analysis of anybody.
Well, yeah, you mean clearly you have personal interest in this, but even for early 1960s, and then later on when you jumped in on that, this was pretty thorough analysis in comparison to even now. I mean, a lot of times these kind of things aren't done. So I think to take, high quality people like Dr. Simon and plug him into this whole situation and really pull out the stuff from separate, and hypnosis sessions, that was pretty cutting edge for the time. I mean, this was flying saucers were just getting into the movies, and that sort of thing. And it was all new. So for them to take that and you following up, that's amazing. I do want to point out to the listeners though, Kathleen is also a Lifetime Achievement Award has a Lifetime Achievement Award. She got it in 2021 from the World UFO Congress. And having won a Lifetime Achievement Award myself in a completely different genre, I congratulate you because that's a big deal. And so,
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just for the listeners. So if you're listening, who is this we're talking to? Not beyond being the niece, she is also in her own right a Lifetime Achievement Award winner in this field of research into the UFO phenomenon and more. So I just want to point that out. And then I would say, listen, the White Mountains is where this took place in New Hampshire. Now, Tommy, you go up there a lot. Yeah, you haven't seen any UFOs up there, have you?
No, I keep my eyes open. I'm not looking for any backseat passages if I can help it.
A lot of people have seen UFOs up there, and I have investigated an abduction case up there as well for the Mutual UFO Network. Very interesting.
Fascinating stuff.
Pretty remote spots up there amongst the mountains, so definitely places to tuck in.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell the listeners too. Now you can hop on to any YouTube channels and so forth, and just Google up Betty and Barney Hill, and you're going to get some fascinating stuff. Obviously, our wonderful guest here has done many other appearances in other places talking about the whole story, but you've really kind of branched off into your own research. I mean, 6 books. Can you tell us a little bit about where those books came from and where you're at now?
Absolutely. I became fascinated with UFOs after and during the time that I was doing this research and investigation. I even went to archival collections. With this, I was working with nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman from 2005 until it was published in 2007 on doing additional research. And Stanton and I found that we worked together very well, because my background is in social science, his was in physical science, and the two of us putting our heads together were a great team in the perspectives that we could offer. So he and I ended up writing 2 additional books. The first one was Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, which I updated in 2021 with new evidence, the new scientific evaluation of the evidence, and witnesses to the event as well. Then we did Science Was Wrong. And from there, and that was about the history of science for the past 150, more than that now, years. And then we did a great deal of research in archives, and especially in Philadelphia at the American Philosophical Society, where the disinformants, skeptics, debunkers, whatever you want to call them, have their correspondence files. And we ended up writing the book Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, based upon our years of archival research. And this is about the history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, their major studies, the findings, the decision to cover up their findings, and those who were involved in the cover-up and what they did to every major case. Then I ended up also specializing in the field of UFO abduction. So I wrote a book called The Alien Abduction Files with Denise Stoner, who was one of the people who had a major case. She was working with me in the Mutual UFO Network, and she and her husband were taken to Craft during a trip. It reminded me initially of what happened to Betty and Barney Hill. Lots of evidence, highly credible people. I even went out to Colorado, that's where they were living at the time, and did an investigation out there. And she has had many, and he has too, follow-up times where they've been taken to Craft repeatedly. And so that was really fascinating. I also wrote of a very important case in the state of New Hampshire, probably the best case I had up there, and several other cases, 6 cases in all. You might have heard of Tom and Matthew Reed case, an intergenerational family abduction. I investigated that, wrote on that as well. So that's the Alien Abduction Files. From there, I did Extraterrestrial Contact, what to do when you've been abducted. And this was part of my work that I was doing. I was the founder and director of the Mutual UFO Network's Experiencer Research Team for 10 years.
Now, well, I'm going to stop you there. So,
Okay.
So much to unload here. Okay, so an experiencer is somebody who's actually interacted with what we would consider aliens, correct?
That's right. And I use the word experiencer because people started to contact MUFON and me and say, you should not be using the word abductee because it implies that people have been kidnapped and they've had a terrible time. That's not true. It happens to some people. Some people have horrible experiences, but for most people, it's not that bad. And there are some who are even having good experiences and want to continue.
Is there a single common denominator in this stuff? I mean, some denominator that everybody experiences during this, or are they all across the board different?
Well, they're sort of different, but there is a procedure that has been used for years. It's not really being used that much anymore, but people like Betty and Barney might see the craft, or they might, these ETs might have been taking people across generations already, and they just come to people's homes, even taking young children. So it could be happening from the time they're born. And then they're taken to craft. They are generally given some kind of physical procedure. Tissue samples might be taken. These ETs are extraordinarily concerned about toxins in the human body, environmental toxins. They're extraordinarily concerned about nuclear waste and nuclear war, that sort of thing. So they do a number of physiological things. They might insert an implant into a person's body. We used to think they were tracking devices, but we think that it's more than that now, that they're probably communication devices, and they can also monitor the health of the human body. As older experiencers become ill, they're taken to an ET environment and healed oftentimes.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I've seen some of the videos where they've removed the little chips and so forth, and a lot of we do a lot of interviews with psychic mediums, and I've had several of them tell me, well, this person has a chip and this one doesn't, and when they do, now whether that's true or not, they can scan that. I have no idea if that's accurate or not, but I have heard them have that communication. I mean, I've stood right there and watched them say, this person has a chip and this one doesn't, that kind of stuff. So it makes me wonder, from just a scientific point of view, especially if they're doing multi-generations, is there a DNA component they're watching, or is it no different than what we would do with taking samples of African lions to see if they're picking up toxics, or toads or frogs, and we're just trying to see how the environment is doing? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it appears that they're very interested in our DNA. They extract reproductive material from men and women. Thousands of experiencers state that they have observed these sort of half human, half ETs being raised in gestational tanks, brought to maturity, and then the experiencers are taken onto craft and help hold these babies and bond with them. These are all reports. It's impossible for any of us to know scientifically if this is true. We don't have the scientific evidence for this, but I've met the children born on this planet of a few experiencers. And these are the kids that we think of as indigo children. They're just outstanding children, highly intelligent. They might be psychic. They'll have a lot of different gifts. So maybe something's going on there, but either that or it's just a fluke that these very special children are born into these families of experiencers.
Yeah. Tommy, you have something on this?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Kathleen.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the encounters seem to be around analyzing the human body. Is there any of these encounters where they're imparting a message to the person that they want to bring forth to, the human race?
Oh, absolutely. That's a part of it. And they've been doing that for years. And I don't know why it hasn't really been promoted among the general public. But the primary messages that they're giving is that they have monitored the human race from the beginning of time, our time, that is, and that they come back from time to time to assist in our development. They came back and remained here when we started detonating nuclear weapons. They've said that this tears into the time-space fabric and causes damage out into other dimensions. And so they're very concerned about us as destructive people. And they are extraordinarily concerned about nuclear war. They don't know a lot about us because they traumatize children and adults by showing images of nuclear war and people's faces melting off and people dying, that sort of thing. Trees blowing down, just some terrible images.
This crosses so many lines in the metaphysical field. I mean, I'm thinking of, because as a master hypnotherapist myself, that's part of it. As a minister, people want to know, do these things that are half alien, half human, do they have a soul, or is a soul even a thing? And then there's the reincarnation groups. Are these things coming to make sure that they can incarnate? Are they incarnating? And what do they look like? And, are they regular humans? Which of course they would be, but, this just crosses a lot of genres. And I guess you guys in your field have to kind of categorize what you're working with, correct? I mean, you can't go doing 8 different, it'd be very difficult. Yeah, I guess you could, but don't people in the MUFON world and likewise kind of specialize in certain things?
We absolutely do. It's impossible to be a generalist in this field and research and even come close to finding answers. So you have to become highly specialized in a particular area. And you're right, it's not all by the same species or the same race. There are, even among the Greys, which is the most prevalent race, there are variations and differences in behavior and their modus operandi, their goals, that sort of thing. The general idea is there that they have lost their ability to reproduce and they need human reproductive material. I've had many reports of people who have been taken to craft and they have been shown sort of holographic scenes that will invoke or evoke very strong emotions. And then these ETs remove tissue from like their adrenal glands, for example. So they are removing things from our bodies. I don't know if it's because they need them, because they might have lost their emotions too, or precisely what they're doing. I think that they're keeping some of these hybrids and even bringing them to the point of being very much like humans in their own environment and working to upgrade us. And that's a message they give to people, that they are attempting to move us ahead on an evolutionary scale. Because we have this problem with being destructive and greedy and engaging in warfare all the time, that sort of thing.
If you do go back to a lot of researchers, they will go way back, way beyond the building of the pyramids and talk about, the Inky and so forth, adjusting DNA to put us in a Homo sapien status, and that we were then given the ability to reproduce ourselves and so forth. And then of course they have since exited, at least from regular walking around life. A lot of people believe that they're coming through consciousness, having those transfers of data and information while you sleep or in trance or meditation or whatnot. There is so much of that to go through and try to analyze. And of course, there's different places across the world with, a crossroads of energy, vortexes, all this sort of thing. I'm even going to take you out to Skinwalker Ranch, since that's out, obviously with its own show and so forth. from, I don't know how much you've watched that or seen that. Do you have a theory on what's going on out there at Skinwalker? Because that's something that's in the news right now.
Well, I have a bit of a theory
Okay.
on that, and through my research and an experimentation as well, I'm aware that there are portals, and that these some of these ETs, I don't know if it's all of them or not, but they come through portals. They're interdimensional. They say they're fifth and sixth dimensional. And out of the Skinwalker Ranch, there's all sorts of activity going on, positive, negative, and everything in between. And what the ETs have told us is that once these portals are opened, and not necessarily by them, it might be by us, and it might even be through detonating nuclear weapons, that all sorts of things come through, interdimensionals, both positive and negative. So you've had some very highly negative activity that has made a lot of news about there, out there. And the federal investigators who went there to do research ended up suddenly finding themselves in a state of terror. And they were confused because they didn't realize what had triggered this. Something can impose that feeling on humans. And when that happens, these entities can attach to these humans. And unless they can raise their vibrational level again, they can take these entities home with them. And that's what these federal investigators did. They took them home. They were waking them up at the ETs or whatever, maybe just negative interdimensionals, were waking them up at night, hovering shadowy figures over their beds. It had never happened before. They were taking their children, spreading out through their family with these attachments. So it was kind of a horror show for them, and they didn't really know what to do about it.
Yeah, I totally get that, because I have interacted with a lot of people who have had very similar stuff. I do dream analysis as well, and I do exorcisms and that sort of things. And of course, the old saying, and the debate is, with churchy church people is what I call them. It's a demon, but other people say no, it's an alien. And then scientific people say, no, it's just low vibrational attachment, all of which is saying pretty much the same thing. You've got something on you, around you, either oppressing you or possessing you, which is very rare, that is causing problems, not only for your environment, but you personally and possibly your loved ones. And so raising the vibration is typically the answer to expulsion of those lower energies. High vibration always boots out low vibration. They can't stand to be around that. Now, what names you put to it or what song and dance you do to get rid of it, that's a belief system that you're socially conditioned to believe since you were real little, typically. And so I want people to understand, I don't care how people interpret it. If you get one of these things on you, you need to seek professional help. And honestly, when I say professional help, I would like to say you could go to your psychologist and psychiatrist, but I honestly, in my true gut, I can't tell you that because they're not trained in that kind of stuff. You really kind of need to reach out to somebody like MUFON and go, okay, do you have some providers that might be able to assist me in what I believe is a situation? Not that I'm saying not go to your doctor. I'm not saying don't go to your psychiatrist. I'm just saying you end up with funny pills and to try to numb it rather than fix it. And you're smiling, so I'm quite sure that you've run into this.
I shouldn't be smiling, but I am.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how this has happened, time and time again to people. And if you go to my website, I actually have some binaural beats. It's all free. It's right off on YouTube that you can listen to. There is guided meditations to raise the vibration. And so many people look for a shaman or a minister, somebody from the clergy. We have the paranormal clergy,
Right.
Not in MUFON, but it's there in many states. But it's growing.
Yes.
I mean, this problem is really growing. in this country at least, and I've heard it's growing in Europe too. So it's important to have resources, a person to go to. The Mutual UFO Network doesn't have much of a list of people. I guess that some states probably, they've encountered this so many times that they probably do have a few people anyway who they can refer people to.
Tommy, you get a lot in your work, same as mine, with attachments, so to speak. Is there, I don't know if yours has come across that it's alien or you don't even care. What's the story?
Yeah, I've never gone deep enough to figure out the origins of them. I just want to get them off the person so they can carry on and bring balance back to their life the way it should be. So.
That's really important. Now, Didini Stoner and Paul Eno are our specialists in this on the ERT, the MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team. So if you go to the Experiencer Resource Team and tell them your problem, then you could probably talk with one of them and they might be able to give you some assistance with that. I picked up one of them when I was working with an experiencer one time. And I have to tell you, I was so curious to find out what these draconian reptilians really were that I went beyond what I would normally do. And I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. And this man gave me information that was so horrific. It lowered my vibration just enough that I could feel all of that positive energy leave my body. And it was like a black cloud was hanging over me immediately. And it started to make me sick. It interrupted my sleep. It was just horrible. And so I did have it removed, and thank goodness it was gone immediately after I had it removed.
Now, let's go to, this will go to one of your books, but two questions, two parts. First off, if you see a UFO, I mean, what you think is UFO or UAP as they're calling them now, what the hell do you do? And then secondly, if you become an experiencer on purpose or otherwise, what do you do there? So kind of a two-part question. You're the expert. What does somebody do who just stumbles across a situation and next thing you know, they're on a craft looking back at Earth or something? Who knows?
Well, if you have a close encounter with a craft, 500 feet or less in the distance, or even 1,000 feet, and you get a really good look at it, if you happen to have your cell phone there, you could even get a photograph of it. Try to get a really clear photograph. Lights in the sky, some distant light in the sky, it could be just about anything. There's a lot up there. And, there are a lot of people who are just hoping and praying that they are going to see a UFO and they just misinterpret. That's most cases are misinterpretations. But if it's close, try to get evidence. If you find yourself being taken to craft, then you should contact the Mutual UFO Network and ask to speak to somebody from MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team. You can also have an investigation. You can do both things. But it's really important, regardless of whether you find out that the experience was positive or negative, you're probably going to be experiencing trauma or anxiety at least. And so you want some support, some help, someone that you can go to talk to. And that's just really important. In my book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, it is a book written for experiencers, those who care about experiencers, the general public, and mental health professionals who work with experiencers as well. So that book is chock full of information for experiencers of contact. You can learn how to investigate your own case, how to collect evidence, the stages that we go through as we process these experiences, how you become more psychic as a result of this, how you might become an empath, how the paranormal might enter your life for the first time, paraphysical phenomena such as light orbs in your home, or the feeling that something unseen is walking on your bed. And even if you wanted to stop, you can't tolerate this any longer, there are suggestions on how to make it end in that book as well. So a lot of information. There is a little questionnaire at the end of every chapter so that you can fill it out, and it will help you to process what has occurred.
Gotcha.
We also have a list of approved hypnotherapists, psychotherapists who work specifically with experiencers. It's important to go to someone who knows about this, because if you just go to any hypnotist, you might come out being more traumatized than you were in the beginning.
Absolutely. Well, we had a gentleman on the podcast, and we called it the modern day witch burning. And all he was doing was recording his observations that were in the metaphysical field, and it got weaponized against him by a family member, and he ended up in the nut house.
Oh my gosh.
The courts put him in. He was in there for, what was it, a couple of weeks, wasn't it, Tom?
At least, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
and he had a phenomenal background in law enforcement, in fact, perfectly normal in every way, known him for 30 years or more. And people need to be cautious about who they're talking to, and because the typical psychologist, psychiatrist is clearly not trained in any of this stuff. That's why having a resource and then an ability to refer to somebody is really important in these cases, I feel. And I've certainly come across a number of things. I know, Kathleen, we've talked off the air and stuff, and I've got a photo I'll have to show you off the air as well that is pretty interesting. I think you'll get a kick out of that. But for folks that are looking for some unusual photos, we do have some on the website. And just also for the listeners, we are going to put all Kathleen's information on the website and links into her books where you can get them. All that'll be on there. So take a look at that. I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to get the resources that you need as you're listening to us and wondering, are these UFOs real? Are they not? Well, the world's coming to conclusions. I mean, in the legal terms, we have the preponderance of evidence, which is like 51% in your mind that's correct. And then there's the beyond a reasonable doubt, which is above 90% in your mind. Is it correct? And I clearly believe we're way beyond the preponderance of evidence, the amount of stuff that's been amassed in a scientific way, as well as, in just observation and so forth, anecdotal ways. But I think it's getting to the point that a lot of people already believe it's way above 90% that this is a real thing. And I get it. The people that are in your line of work are, generally at that 90 percentile at least, if not 100, and especially the experiencers. So I don't want to ever say that that's not accurate. I just know that, as you know, sorting through the naysayers and the people who didn't see it themselves, and you're never going to convince everybody until they are on a craft themselves and floating out towards who knows where. And then they go, oh, I guess you guys were right. That kind of stuff. It's kind of like when we do psychic medium stuff and there's some family member who didn't believe in any of that, then they die, and then they're coming through and they're going, yeah, you were right. This is exactly what it is. And I think in this situation, it's somewhat similar. But I did have a little talk to you about an individual, well, several of them, but that had experiences with a craft actually landing in their backyard, which has never actually been publicized anywhere. And then they had 7 crafts within 2 weeks. 7 crafts leave the immediate area. And another family member saw them speeding away into the sky. And the first family member also saw that had experienced the landing situation. And then I talked about another woman who had what was praying mantis type individuals that are lurking about from time to time. And so I want people to understand some of the folks that I'm connected to that have been in government, and some of, lot of things that are deep. Let's just put it that way. You know, there's multiple different reports of different types of quote unquote aliens. And you really need to get a basic science understanding of dimensions, what that is, what it's not, and you know how energy shifts from one dimension to another. And quantum physics is getting there. They're making some strides that are amazing. And if people, they just have to be educated into this. So when you say they're going from a portal from one dimension to another, then, which is correct, but you got to back the average Joe six-pack up and say, here's what a dimension actually is. A portal means this, and they're moving from here to here. Because the one I remember a lot is a lady who was sitting in her or standing washing dishes in her kitchen, and all of a sudden, bingo, a full-blown reptilian type thing showed up, standing there, bipedal, standing there, and he's looking at her, and she's looking at it, and she goes, ah, and he goes, ah. They both were kind of startled by each other, and then all of a sudden, poof, he disappears. So did he actually disappear, or he just slid into another dimension and sharing space? And if people understood what they were sharing with, it would be a little different world, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're right. And, you know, it's just so perplexing and complicated. It really is very complicated.
It is complicated.
When you try to understand all of this. It took me years to wrap my head around the dimensions. I just couldn't imagine what it was like. I was a nuts and bolts researcher for the first 20 years or so. And then finally, I couldn't deny it any longer.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and as a investigator, that's what I did for 30 years. And then went into this field, which is also investigation. So I took those skills from actual police investigations, just slid them over into metaphysical investigations, very, very similar stuff, actually, and use those principles. You start going down the line and you get this clue and then this clue and then this clue, and pretty soon it runs you down the primrose path, and you eventually get to the point of going, bingo, here's my target. This is the real thing, and this is what I've discovered. And then you try to put a case together for that. And I know MUFON, that's, you know, they teach their investigators, the people that maybe weren't investigators in their normal life, how to do that in a very responsible way. And I do know one, or I guess he's kind of quasi-retired from it, but we've had long discussions, and he just saw a big three-pointed, like triangular looking thing. It was like 10:10 p.m. He went out to let the dog, you know, do his business, and he looked up, and there it was. And he was like, holy cow. And it was huge, and nobody else reported it. He was standing there, and he goes, I was so involved in looking at it, I didn't have time to run in and get my cell phone to take a picture because, well, he wasn't planning on seeing it, you know, and he didn't have anything with him. He was in his pajamas. So there you go. He did finally report it to MUFON, you know, so they could have it. But I think a lot of people, that they stumble across things and they're unprepared for it, and they're just kind of mesmerized by the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I always say, be careful what you wish for, because I've worked on some cases where people have wished to meet these entities, and then they were not happy with what they received when they finally did show up.
Well, Dr. Greer, Stephen Greer, you know, he has his own take on this and group and so forth. And my understanding is they do get groups together and do meditation for contact to draw them in. And I've seen a couple of photos they posted of supposedly aliens within a portal, I guess. And I don't know how much, you know, people would really believe that, because a lot of it seems very far-fetched. But then again, if you're not exposed to it all the time, anything looks far-fetched unless you're involved in it all the time. You know, if all you're doing is getting a paycheck on Friday, hitting the bar, shooting some pool, and then going home, it all looks far-fetched. It's like, you know, trying to fly an F-15 and you've only seen a Piper Cub. I mean, it's just, completely different world. So you got any take on Dr. Greer and his stuff? Because he seems like he's a pretty logical guy, pretty smart
Well,
man.
he is one person that you could go to if you want to safely try to make contact and see craft, or maybe even an entity, because he knows how to keep the vibration high. So I say it's best to be with someone who keeps that higher vibration, because you don't want to end up with a reptilian taking you somewhere. That's not a good thing.
Not a good thing at all. And just for the listeners, Dr. Greer is an MD. He was in emergency medicine. He's retired at this point because he's full-time involved in all these phenomenon and trying to get very close to government officials and other people and folks on the other side as well. He knows a tremendous amount of data that a lot of people would like to have, I'm sure. So, Tommy, you got some follow-up questions?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Kathleen, the people that you've researched, I know in your family's history there, a lot of the information came recalled through hypnosis. As they've evolved, and we're evolving theoretically at least, are they able to recall that more consciously, or does it still have to be tapped into through other means? What are you finding?
I find that generally, just like with Betty and Barney, people can remember part of it. But not all of the experience that happened. You might remember 3-4 minutes, but you've been missing for 2 hours. And then it's like going into anesthesia and then coming out of anesthesia. Suddenly you're back there and you have no memory of falling back asleep, even though you were awake. You remember that these entities were in your environment. You might remember being whisked away into craft. You might remember being on a table even, but then you're blank. And so hypnosis by the right people is very good, but I also warn against hypnosis. I'm a hypnosis practitioner using forensic hypnosis and the quantum healing hypnosis technique developed by Dolores Cannon over a 40-year period. And combining the two of those is very good, I think. So because I do not lead people, I do everything within my power to make sure that people have a true regression, that it's a true memory of what has occurred. Whereas there are people out there who will hypnotize someone who hasn't been taken, but who knows a lot about it and really is a wannabe. They just want this experience, and they can develop their own little story of what happened based upon what they've seen or what they've read. And I've worked for years on the study of hypnosis as well. I've read the academic studies on hypnosis. You can actually read my latest report on my website at kathleen-marden.com. And you want to have a true regression. It's just not a good idea to go around as a wannabe saying, oh, gee, this is happening to me too. And that happens to some people.
The other question I had is, I know a lot of the encounters you said earlier, people have more of a, for lack of better, a negative experience, but yet some had a positive experience. For the listeners, what would you say is probably the most positive experience you've heard of?
I think the most positive experiences are when there is contact between the ET and the human, and both want this contact. So generally, it is not being taken to craft. Generally, it is the human has developed a relationship with these interdimensionals. I had the opportunity to work on an experiment on this with a team of researchers, again, using scientific instruments. It's all in my book, Forbidden Knowledge. And these, I mean, you can have a very positive relationship because they'll come to you. You can feel very strong electrical tingling. I think probably just like Betty and Barney had. But these are highly positive fifth and sixth dimensional entities. I've even met a couple of ninth dimensional entities, and they will just do really kind things. That you can communicate with them, you can receive information. They'll watch over you almost like a guardian angel in a sense. So they're definitely higher evolved individuals who are doing this. I've never actually had one materialize in front of me. I would love to have that happen. They've shown me craft, they've shown me orbs, and us. We've been able to measure their presence with a laser thermometer. With the fifth and sixth dimensionals, there's about a 7-degree increase in the temperature. And with the ninth dimensionals, it's a 10-degree increase in the temperature where they are standing in the room, that particular part of the room. So it was probably the weirdest. I thought I'd never talk about it, but the weirdest experiment I've ever done, but also the most gratifying. It's very nice to have that presence, that because it's so highly positive.
You know, when you talk about these fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, etc., dimensions, I think people think that these are higher beings than us, but I always try to remind people, listen, you're spirit. You were spirit before you came into this bag of bones that you currently inhabit. You chose to come here. Mm-hmm. You have been in these different dimensions, but where you're playing out right now is in a third, going into fourth, as some people say, blah, 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 a lot of debate on that. But it's a vibratorial environment mm-hmm. that has certain limitations, and we're all compressed into these bodies for obvious reasons. We want to learn something. We want to experience emotions. We want to experience all the whole patent place of life. And, a lot of people are sucked into the fear, and I think it's been perpetrated by many religions and like-minded other people, and they fear everything, and that will certainly keep you in a low vibration if you're fearful, correct?
Absolutely. Fear is what the lower vibrationals feed off. The way that these higher dimensionals described it to me is that on their planets, they are as solid as we are. Life is not that much different than it is on Earth. Of course, they're more advanced technologically than we are. They no longer war. They have better treatment for disease. They live longer, that sort of thing. So their societies are more highly developed, but they're, it's just that it is a higher vibration. So the way I explain it to people when they want to know what it is they talk about it in terms of atoms. I'll talk about it in terms of molecules. Think of placing a tray of ice cubes into a pan, and then you heat those ice cubes and they turn into water. Okay, humans are the water. And then the water boils and there is steam. So these are these higher dimensionals. If we see them here, oftentimes they are like shadow entities. You can see through them. But then as the molecules become more activated, you cannot even see that steam, but it's still there. Those are the ninth dimensionals. The ninth dimensionals say that they used to have bodies thousands of years ago, but they no longer have bodies, that they've reached the higher dimensions. Reminds me a little bit of the Buddhist teachings in India, in a sense. So, but that's the way I explain it, and I think that people can understand that. Right. That when we go to their environment, say we are in their environment. They can see us, we can see them, we can feel them. They're as real as standing next to another human being. But they have to lower their vibration if they want to be seen here on this planet.
Yeah, it's, that's what I tell people with mediumship is, we're here and they're here vibrating, and we got to meet in the middle, thus mediumship, and we have one person has to raise, the other has to lower, so we can have communication. And whether that's third eye visible or it's hearing, whatever, feeling, whatever it may be. But what's your take on demons then? I mean, since you just described the high end, what about the low end? What's your take on that?
They are just seeking lower vibrating individuals to attach to feed off. They feed off fear, off suffering. That's why if they come into your environment and they can manage to attach to you, you become ill. I unfortunately worked with a man in the beginning, this is probably 15 years ago, before I had the level of knowledge that I have now. And he did have demonic attachments, and they actually took his life. They fed off him so badly that it's really sad. I've studied about the vibrational level with some scientific work that was done in India. And in India, they gave people, test subjects, alcohol, and they would measure somehow their vibrational frequency. And they discovered that after you have 2 drinks, then your vibrational frequency tends to drop a little bit. And they believe that all alcoholics have these attachments, these negative entity attachments. Also, individuals who are in a great deal of pain, people who have a history of depression that's untreated, can also have this happen, because these entities are just there to make a feast out of human suffering.
Yeah,
and they grow.
Totally get what you're saying, because I tell them you're like a giant Slurpee and they're just sticking a straw in you and sucking out of you every day.
Yes.
Do you have a quick stop remedy to raise your vibration? I mean, everybody has their own gig. Do you have something you tell somebody, here's your first aid, here's how you raise your vibration?
Well, I like to do it through chakra meditations.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really helps. You can bring divine light down into your body, and you can expand that light into all of the cells in your body to remove any blockages. That's one of the things I offer on my website, in fact. But you can also get these guided meditations to raise the vibration on YouTube if you want to. It doesn't cost a penny.
Right.
So that is where I suggest that people start with this. Some people are worried that this is Buddhist or something. It's not. One of my best friends has her doctorate. She's a Christian minister, and it was a nun who actually taught her how to do this. So I'm a Christian.
Totally get that.
No problem.
I mean, raising vibration. And when you say bring light in, now, like I said, I referred to Joe Sixpack. Well, I don't see no damn light coming into me. What you talking about? I mean, and, that's bullshit. And, I can just hear it, because that's where I live. And so, my God, somebody's making some shit up around here. But what it is, it's within your mind, and it's using your imaginative forces, which are real. And if you see it in your mind, you're actually creating that, but not in the third dimension. You're creating that in higher dimensions by accessing your mind, your higher self, whatever. And so I want to clarify that for the listeners.
Yes, thanks for doing that, because you're very, very relaxed.
Yeah.
Have your eyes closed and you're visualizing, bringing this thread of divine light spiraling down from the heavens in
Absolutely.
through the top of your head.
Absolutely.
And then you go all the way down through the chakras, and you root yourself to this planet, and you go down to the center of the earth and bring sacred earth energy back up as well.
I think that's coming. What's going to be is that, dealing with interdimensional beings, if there is all those things, if that's proven to be the thing, it's going to be through a meditative state. It's going to be through your consciousness, and that's already happening. We know that with like Stargate and other things they had back in the day. That's how you are going to communicate with these other entities. So could you? Yes, the physical craft, yes. But I think in the future, as if you want to communicate, you're going to have to do it through the third eye or beyond. I really feel like that's going to be your primary way to do it, because I don't think landing a lot of craft in the numbers necessary to convince the population of something is possible. I mean, it can be, I suppose. But I will go back to one lady who did have that craft land in her backyard. She said, she talked to this guy, and she goes, the best I could tell you was he looked like Thanos off of the Marvel comics. That's the best, description of him. And he was in a kind of a uniform, and she asked what he was. She goes, we're kind of like a police force. And she actually told me what the name of it was. It escapes me right now what the name was, but it was the same exact name. And this gal knew nothing about any of this. I mean, this was not her gig at all. But the same one that the Canadian Prime Minister or Minister of Defense, he's deceased now, the same Confederation of something or another, Intergalactic Federation. I think, yeah, that's what Intergalactic Federation. He told her that he was from that, and she called me and she goes, "What is that? What does that even mean?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that's a thing. That's a real thing." So if you're starting to get those things line up, from here, you had a Canadian defense minister who would have access to top classified information. And then you got, a housewife here that's hearing the same thing from a guy who looks like Thanos, and he was very gentle, very nice, and gave a little reading about, her children and her husband and, so on and so forth. And they were here to help and to make sure we didn't do anything real stupid. But she actually asked him about the pandemic, because it was during that, but he didn't know anything about that. He didn't have really any answer for that, which was, I guess, a little surprising, I suppose, if they're really monitoring that close. That's something, but I don't know if it was the word that he didn't understand or just what, but who knows? But you get all that. It's nothing you haven't heard 1,000 times.
You do. And it reminds me of a woman in Maine. And this happened to her in 1954. And she was a neighbor of Admiral, or he was actually a rear admiral. We called him Admiral Knowles. And he had retired, and she had this entity just materialize in front of her and give her information. And then they started giving her information all the time. And I mean, every day, and disturbing her sleep at night. And so she finally had to arrange a time of day to take their information. So she had a huge packet of information, and she didn't know what to do with it. So she took it to Admiral Knowles. And she said, would you look this over? I think that it's important. And if you think it's important, please pass it on to the people who need to have it. So he read it, and this was a housewife with only a high school education, but it had advanced scientific information that she couldn't possibly have known. He passed it on to Margaret Chase Smith, who was the senator in Maine, and she took it to Washington to Dwight Eisenhower. And it ended up, Wilbert Smith, the UFO guy from the Canadian government, was in on this. The FBI, the CIA, the Navy, and the Air Force. And it was quite an experiment. That's the reason that I agreed to do this experiment that I talked about, working on I wanted to learn more, and I thought, well, heck, if they can do it, I can do it too. It's not that embarrassing, I guess.
Yeah, having worked in government, I can tell you, if you can do it, they can do it. They're no different than anybody else. So all 3-letter words and stuff. So yeah, so this is fascinating. Tell me, you got a wrap-up question here?
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's coming more mainstream. Just this week in the news was broadcast about a green triangle over Las Vegas was caught on a body camera, and people with their Ring doorbells were picking up sounds and such that coincided with the timing. So I think you'll hopefully, with your research, more people will come forward and share their stories, so it won't be as difficult to dig up the proper resources to get at the truth.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And pay attention to what's being written by people like Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, because people from the government who whistleblowers who have verifiable high-level positions in the federal government are beginning to come forward more. And one just came forward last weekend with some information about crash saucers and our possession of these materials.
Fascinating. We could talk for hours. This is so cool. Kathleen, what do you want to leave the audience with? I mean, obviously, tell us your website again, but then what do you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I want to say that most of these entities are fine. They're not here to harm us. So I think that's important. And for anyone that might be here to harm us, they keep them at bay. My website is kathleen-marden.com. If you'd like to know where I'm going to be speaking this year, it's on the website. Also, Dr. Melanie Barton and I are working on a survey that is on my website on religious belief and extraterrestrial life. Anyone can fill it out. We greatly appreciate it if you would do that. We're looking for 1,000 people to do this before we can have people do the statistical analysis on it for us. And it will be published in a new book, but it's going to be completely confidential. Don't worry about us revealing your identity. We won't even know your identity. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Well, we appreciate you. And Tom, you have a wrap-up statement?
Yeah, Kathleen, I was just going to ask, would you mind spelling your first and last name? Because some people that their listeners not visual, so they're not going to see this.
Yes, absolutely. It's KATHLEEN-MARDEN.com for my website.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time with us today. This has been really insightful, and man, good luck with this research. If you get some more stuff, by all means, come on back and let's do it again.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with both of you.
And folks, check out the metaphysicalmysteries.com. We will have all the link ups for Kathleen's information. And if you have anything you want to share, we will take that in and get it back out to everybody. So from all of us here at the Metaphysical Mysteries, we want to thank Kathleen for showing up, and Tommy and I'll be back with another amazing guest. Have a great day.